He has called 400 races from a folding chair bolted to a chain link platform, and not one of them has been his. 2 years ago, he had a license, a number, and a car with his father's handwriting still on the dash in grease pencil. Then Brody Lane turned left when there was no reason to turn left, clipped his rear quarter at 140, and watched Reese Calder's car go up the wall in front of 9 cameras. The replay showed contact. The steward's room showed something else. By the time the inquiry closed, the official record read reckless lane change. R. Calder, and his provisional license was gone before the tow truck finished its second loop of the infield. The sponsor went next. Faro Tools had backed his father's shop for 11 years, through 2 bankruptcies and 1 fire. And then, 3 weeks before the new season's entry bond was due, Faro's parent company was quietly acquired and the racing budget vanished from a line item nobody bothered to explain to him. He didn't learn until later that the buyer was a shell 2 firms removed from Holt Mercer, who owned the Apex Series' biggest team and had wanted Calder Racing's lease on Bay 14 for 6 years. The bond went unpaid. The bank took the shop 8 months after that. His father had died the year before, so at least he wasn't there to watch it happen. What was left of Reese Calder was a name on a clipboard that pit crews called when they needed an extra set of eyes on the wall. Stand 6, $10 an hour over scale, no team, no contract, no name on headset. He watched fuel windows for drivers who wouldn't shake his hand in the garage. He called draft gaps for rookies who didn't know his face. He got good at it the way a man gets good at anything he's not allowed to do for himself. Completely, quietly, with nowhere else to put the attention. Draft tokens accumulated. 1,140 hours. Threshold reached. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday practice session at Salt Flat Oval. Nothing on the line, half the grandstand empty. Reese was watching car 9 come off turn 3 when the air around it stopped looking like air. He saw the turbulence peel off the rear bumper in a visible curl, like heat over asphalt, and inside that curl he could read, not guess, read, exactly how many laps of tread the right rear had left, exactly where the fuel level sat to the 10th of a gallon, exactly where the draft pocket would open 3 cars back in 4.1 seconds. Absolute line, active. Classification, unranked / above telemetry / the line. He didn't tell anyone. He sat very still and watched it happen 9 more times that day, and 9 more times the numbers in his head matched the numbers on the official timing screen to the decimal. Nobody on that wall had ever called a race that clean. Nobody on that wall was supposed to be able to. For a year, he said nothing and used it for nothing because a spotter with no license and no team has nowhere to put a gift like that. He kept working the chain link platform. He kept the shop's old sign, Calder Racing, half the paint gone. In a storage unit he was 3 months behind on. He watched Brody Lane win 4 more races and call him the wall guy once on camera with a grin that made the broadcast booth laugh along. Then he found the clause. It was buried in the National Motorsport Commission's original 1987 bylaws, never repealed because nobody since had thought to use it. Once a season, at the Commission's discretion, Granite Crown Speedway could host a single open invitational exhibition. No points, no purse, full field of licensed Apex Series regulars plus exactly 1 unlicensed entrant with a roadworthy car and a clean criminal record. Run live on the same broadcast as the regular schedule for historic and promotional value. It hadn't been used in 11 years. It was still, technically, the law of the series. Reese pulled his father's old car out of the storage unit. Chassis number 3, the one Wyatt Calder built by hand, the one that hadn't turned a lap since the bay was repossessed, and spent 6 weeks getting it from barely running to legally roadworthy with a torque wrench, a parts catalog, and absolutely no help from anyone who used to call him family in the garage. He filed the entry himself. The commission clerk who processed it didn't recognize the name. Nobody flagged it. Nobody thought a car that old, driven by a man with no license history and no sponsor, was worth flagging. Holt Mercer found out 4 days before the race, when his name showed up on the entry list next to Brody Lane's, and laughed about it in front of 3 reporters. Brody Lane, defending the exhibition for the 2nd year running because it photographed well for his sponsors, said he didn't even remember the wall guy's first name. Race day, Reese started 32nd, dead last. A field of 11 other professional cars and one 15-year-old chassis with a man behind the wheel who hadn't driven competitively in 2 years. He didn't need to remember how to drive. He needed the air to keep talking to him, and it did. By lap 12, the broadcast booth noticed the fuel strategy first. Car 3 wasn't pitting on the lap everyone expected, and somehow it wasn't losing time either, riding a draft pocket that kept opening exactly where it needed to be. By lap 30, he'd passed 9 cars without a single aggressive move, sliding through gaps that closed the instant after he was through them, like he'd known they'd be there before the cars in front of him did. The booth started calling it luck, and they started calling it eerie. Then the lead broadcast spotter patched into the open exhibition frequency because the old bylaw required full transparency, started repeating Reese's own radio calls on air because they were more precise than the official timing feed. On lap 51, threading between 2 cars at the exact angle of a wreck that had ended his career 2 years earlier on this same kind of asphalt, something in him said it out loud without deciding to. Inside's tight, same gap as Coral Bay, same angle Brody took on me. He turned with no reason to turn. I've got the room he didn't. It went out live. The booth's data engineer, sitting on 2 years of archived telemetry nobody had ever cross-checked because nobody had asked, pulled the old Coral Bay file out of habit and laid Reese's words over Brody Lane's steering input from that race. They matched within a degree. Live, on air, in front of the same cameras that had ended Reese Calder's license. The booth said the word nobody at the commission had ever wanted said about its biggest team's biggest driver. Deliberate. Up in the suite, Holt Mercer was already on the radio to his pit wall before the second replay finished airing, telling Brody to close the gap on car 3 any way he had to. Reese saw the closing angle form in the shimmer a full 2 seconds before Brody committed to it, dropped a half car width low, and let Brody's front splitter find nothing but clean track. On the very next straight, at the apex Brody had used to end his career, Reese went by him clean, legal, and unhurried, like a man closing a door rather than winning a race. He took the checkered flag 4 seconds clear of the field, in a 15-year-old car his father built with his own hands, on a license he didn't legally have. Holt Mercer met him at the edge of the winner's circle before the commission officials could, off camera, low and fast, walk it back. Tell them the radio glitched, the data's bad, whatever you want, I'll fund a shop, double what Pharaoh gave you, just walk it back. The man who'd quietly bought out a sponsor and a building and a clean record was standing in gravel, asking a former wall spotter for mercy. And Reese let the silence sit there a second longer than it needed to before he answered. No. The commission's review took 4 minutes, because the data was already on every screen in the building. Brody Lane's 2-year-old win at Coral Bay was vacated for deliberate contact. Holt Mercer was suspended pending a full inquiry into the Pharaoh acquisition and the seizure of Bay 14. The lease ordered frozen until the findings came back. Reese Calder's license was reinstated on the spot, backdated, with a new classification typed into the commission record because no existing one fit a man who'd qualified through a 15-year-old loophole and a class nobody had a name for yet. Open path. First entrant. Brody Lane stood by his car for the trophy photos that never happened and said nothing else about the wall guy. That day or any day after. 3 weeks later, the bank handed back the keys to Bay 14. The lien dissolved the same week as Mercer's suspension. Reese rehung his father's sign himself, one bent letter at a time, Calder Racing catching the last light the way it used to before any of it was taken. He stood in the open bay doorway a long time, looking at chassis number 3 still parked where the trophy photos should have been, and didn't say anything either, because for the first time in 2 years there was nothing left that needed proving out loud.